And now we move on to public participation, and Rex Harrison, who has made a submission on our annual plan, unfortunately was missed during the hearings process, so I'd like to invite Rex Harrison to present his submission to the council. Thank you. If you just press your wee button on your speaker there, that'll turn green and you'll be away.
Thank you. I'd like to express my thanks for being able to speak to my submission this late in the process. Clearly, United Airlines could take a lesson from the council in putting things right. My submission hangs on three principles. The first is that rating does not necessarily follow the taxation principle, that taxation should reflect the ability to pay. Now, Councillors Buck and Johansson may remember way back when the council prepared its first revenue policy at the turn of the last century, the data was presented that showed the capital value did not necessarily reflect a person's ability to pay rates, particularly those on a fixed income. In my own case, for example, when I retired, my income went down, my income tax went down, the GST I pay went down, my rates went up, and my rates, I gather, are going to continue going up. Clearly, something has to change. The second principle is that rates rises are cumulative. The impact is cumulative. It's tempting to look at the rate rise and divide it by the number of weeks and come to the conclusion that the rate rise on the average property is no more than the price of an espresso per week. But over the course of the 3 years covered by the present long-term plan, the rate rise on an average property adds up to a week's take-home pay to a couple on the pension. So instead of getting 52 weeks pay, they get 51 weeks pay. Clearly there needs to be a restraint, and that raises the question of where can the council apply restraint without doing harm to its city. I would submit that the best place to look for restraints is on transfer payments, and this is the third principle I'm making, is that making transfer payments, people who are struggling to pay their rates or find paying the rates an issue may end up subsidizing people who are better off than themselves. So, clearly cuts have to be made. Where can it go? And as I said, without doing harm to the city, the most fruitful place to make cuts would be in transfer payments. Now, the council makes some $28 million in transfer payments each year, voluntary grants. It's scheduled out in my submission. If half of these were cut, that would result in a saving of $12 million per year, which would make a significant dent in the rates rise. And that basically, councillors and Mayor, your worship, is my submission, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Speaker back on. Questions? Yeah, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission. Just on that third point then, have you been able to take that further over how that actually factors out in terms of actual savings?
Well, according to the information the council provided, there's about just shy of $24 million in discretionary payments. They don't go into any great detail on what those payments are. I'm just suggesting reduce them by about $12 million. Where to reduce them, I don't have enough information to make an informed recommendation on that. I believe the people around this table are best placed to decide where such cuts should be made.
Okay, so you aren't able to land on an actual rate figure as such?
Well, $12 million saving, what would that result? 2% saving in the rates?
Yeah, capital OPEX, yeah.
Depends on what it is.
Yeah. And I think that part is also when land values increase and rates go up, so there's an exponential increase. I mean, that's one on top of the other. So property values go up, rates go up, and it's on an increased rate. So even if there was a zero rate increase, there still would be an increase in rates. Yeah,
except that property values determine your share of the rates,
that's
not
right.
the rates themselves. And so even though property values go up, then that just changes the way rates are distributed.
Not if it
the cost of the rate rise arises from increased expenditure.
That's what I'm saying is that there's a realignment across the city and some go down, then the proportion does increase.
Yeah. Indeed, in individual cases, that will indeed be the case. I'm looking at the broad picture across the board. Some will be affected more severely, some will be affected less severely than others.
Yeah. Would you favour us looking perhaps in the longer term at separating the land value from, rating on land value as opposed to improvements as well? The rating system itself is not at issue. At issue is council expenditure. Because no matter what method you use to calculate the rights, your expenditure is still increasing, and it's the expenditure that needs to be contained rather than change the way that rates are calculated. Now, just as an aside, in the best of all possible worlds, local government would do a lot more than it's doing at the present. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Funded by
your
central
taxation
government.
revenue system forces you into this strange bind. You're not in a position to do what the government is doing if commentators on the budget are to be believed.
Yeah. No, I agree entirely. Yeah. No, look, thank you very much for your submission, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Right, now we move to deputations by appointment. And could I invite Duncan Webb to come forward? A terrible waste of paper. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. First of all, just a disclosure and really clarification. Although I am standing for public office, I'm acting today as a lawyer for Mr Bonis and the residents. The issue, it's important to clarify what the issue here is, because I think there has been some confusion. This is not about sex work per se. What this is about the conduct of disruptive commercial activities. And as the document which I've distributed to Council shows, in the appended documents there, this is a problem that's been ongoing in this area, that is to say the Purchase Manchester Street area, since 2011 and 2012 at least. And a cursory review of those documents will show that the problem has not abated. I don't intend to speak directly to the paper I've presented, but really just to summarise some notes. There are real concerns around the council report that I've identified. The survey which was undertaken by council seems to take an inappropriate starting place, and certainly 8 nights is not enough to establish any kind of trend. The lived experience of the residents is that this problem is ongoing and is not abating. Every spring it resurfaces after some quietude in the winter. It is our firm view that the council already has the power to regulate this matter through the Public Places Bylaw. The council's view, provided in a legal opinion, is that it has no power. The Public Places Bylaw doesn't cover the situation. My legal view is that that is clearly wrong, and I would urge the council to revisit that opinion for the reasons set out in detail. There's a couple of other things I want to identify. Not only is this not about sex and sex work per se, it's also not about the Bill of Rights Act. There's no suggestion. It's accepted that sex work and prostitution is a legal trade. It's entirely permitted. However, many trades are legal, but there's no suggestion that they can be conducted all hours of the day or night in residential areas, whether that be selling sexual services or ice creams or coffee or whatever that might be. So there's no suggestion that there's some infringement of rights of the sex workers. The other thing to note is that this council has a duty to protect its communities. And I want to take a moment to identify that this is not only about the residents, it is about the people who engage in the sex work, and they need to be cared for and protected. But those interests also need to be balanced against the interests of the residents. This is a very residential neighbourhood. It's mixed use in terms of who lives there. There's rentals, there's families, there's older people, there's young people, and they can't live ordinary lives in their leafy suburb because of the disruption that's occurred. If you go through the documents, and it's only a sampling, you'll see that they have been pressing for years for this problem to be addressed. This is not some carpers and whingers who don't like living in an urban setting. This is a problem that is directly affecting people, and I know you'll hear from people today who haven't been able to put up with it and who have in fact left. I was concerned to see that when the council executive in its paper identified the risks, it identified litigation risk. This is not about litigation. The real risks here are risks to people and communities. And you'll see that there has been, in my paper I presented, there have been violent instances. There have been instances of assault. There have been instances of threats and threats to kill. So that, they are real and immediate threats that need to be addressed and avoided. There has been damage to property. Look, we know these are criminal offences, but unfortunately the police resources are pressed. There's documentation showing a lack of police response to these incidents. I'm not criticising the police, but I'm saying that action is needed to address it. The other risks are risks to amenity. The risk that this stops being a neighbourhood in which a diverse group of people can live, and a loss of community value and values. That the community is in fact broken up by this disruptive behaviour. And also the other risk we need to identify is the risks to the workers. We need to find a solution to this, and I think the solution exists in the Public Places Bylaw and the proper enforcement of it, the proper education in respect of it, and the proper persuasion around it. But we need to protect not only the communities but the workers by providing and ensuring that they have a safe and appropriate place to work, which is free of the kind of conflict which arises here. So the Public Places Bylaw is really the crux of the matter. And the council has a view, or its legal advisor from 2011 has a view that what goes on in these street corners is not a commercial activity. This, frankly, defies belief. In the very same document where that is recited in the council paper, we also have a survey which identifies how many street workers are out. That is utterly contradictory to, on the one hand, say we're identifying street workers and then say in the next breath they're not actually engaging in a commercial activity. That is to say, they're not working. So the commercial activity includes trading, selling, hiring or displaying for sale any goods or services, including advertising goods or services or events. Now, the fact of the matter is that there is evidence of the services themselves being provided in a public space. But even if that weren't the case, the mere fact that these people choose to work in this area is exactly the same as any of these other identified activities. They are presenting themselves to provide services, whether those services are provided in public or elsewhere, and that's a commercial activity. So in that sense, we see that there is really enough tools there for council to take action. Can we say, however, that this is not an either or? We're not saying bring a harsh enforcement regime down. What we are saying is we need to have in the background effective tools to coerce as an absolute last resort. Obviously, and may I say that the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective have been very cooperative and helpful. We don't agree on everything, but we identify the problem, and I know you'll hear from them. We entirely accept that the appropriate first course of action is persuasion and education. However, at the moment, there is a misunderstanding by this council and by the street workers themselves that what is going on is entirely permitted. It's not. What we need to note is that it's not permitted, that there are other options and opportunities, and that some persuasive tools and education need to be used. It would be the best outcome if no prosecutions in respect of this were ever made. However, unless it's possible to enforce this bylaw, there is absolutely no reason to move away from these residential areas. That's why action is needed. I'm aware that the council's time is precious, so I think I'll stop there and be available for any questions should you have any.
So the residents would favour a bylaw that was, I mean, if it was not accepted that the existing bylaw gave us powers, the residents would accept a change to the bylaw that made it explicit about where sex work could take place.
That would be an amendment which would make some sense. The inverse would be to tweak the definition to make it clear that sort of loitering with a view to providing services or goods, whether on-site or elsewhere, is a commercial activity.
I don't know that loitering's a good phrase to use under the circumstances.
Yeah, I'm aware of there being other
Bus
issues, but the
Yeah.
gist is clear. That would be the other way around it.
Well, but that would lead to permits being required, and
Yeah, clause 13, I think it is, makes it clear that you can have sort of areas which are set aside where no permit is required.
yes, that's right.
Yes.
And that might be the easier way to go. Yanni and who is it? Is it you? Oh, okay.
I was just going to ask.
Yanni.
We don't have a list of the. Yeah, it's up there. So, are any other residents from that area going to speak, or is this the one chance we've got to ask questions? I see Matt sitting at the table.
I understand that a former resident is going to speak.
Okay. Well, can I just ask a question then of you and to the resident sitting next to you? You haven't really talked much about the cause of the problem, although in the staff report it does go to the fact that some of this is to do with the way in which the cordon was applied in the central city, the changing physical environment. Have you thought about any other solutions, like no stopping restrictions at night, which council used very successfully in Morehouse Ave, or traffic changes at the Manchester-Beeley intersection that could actually deal with some of the causes of the problem in a more timely manner?
Yeah, those matters have all been traversed by council before, and the council provided me its full file on this matter, and no stopping restrictions and other turning restrictions have been identified, but for whatever reason, nothing along those lines has been implemented to date.
Do you have a view on whether we should be looking at those?
Yeah, I do have
more immediate ways of dealing with the situation created by.
I do have a view, and the view is that all tools should be used, but unless and until an enforcement mechanism underlies those tools, they will not be particularly useful, because the council has tried, and the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective have tried to use the tools that are available.
Paula, I'll allow Pauline one quickly.
Yeah, just to clarify, you touched on it in your deputation, but the conflict of information we had in the staff report, which is claiming that it is easing and it is naturally moving back into the CBD. Sorry, I've got myself on. The conflict in the report, which our staff report says that the activity is actually moving back in towards the CBD. You're saying that there's no evidence of that from the residents around this area of Purchase Street. Can we clarify that, please?
Yeah, thank you. What I can say is that the presence of workers on the street is seasonal. There is a natural decline as we enter a winter period, but across 6+ years, what we have seen is it simply be revisited every spring. So, and at the earlier forum, Mr. Bonis presented a months-long survey which indicated on almost every night, not only were street workers present, but there was disruption at some level. So it's abundantly clear that the 8-night council survey was an inadequate investigation.
All right, thank you.
Very good. Look, thank you very much. Thank you for presenting to us and for the extensive paperwork as well. Thank you. Catherine Healy and Bridie Sweetman from the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective.
fine this morning, so let's hope it does now. Just switch over a moment. Sorry. Just switch over.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've been working with these issues for 30 years, and we certainly commiserate with the residents and hope that we can find a non-regulatory resolution. I've put this cartoon, because it takes me back to when it was published, I think, in one of your dailies, the last time we had a discussion, and it, as you can tell, it dehumanises sex workers and refers to them as meat. I hope that this kind of debate doesn't spawn that kind of response. My ticking off. We contract the Ministry of Health, just to give some of you a background, and we work across the country, and we also work in an international way as well. We're often called on to give expert advice, including to such countries as the Netherlands, South Africa, Vietnam, just to name a few. So we have a great deal of experience in terms of these issues. I also have personal experience. I lived and worked through the days when we had the Summary Offences Act and soliciting was a crime. And I can say that cut right across our relationship with the police, which is a very important relationship that has changed in the context of decriminalisation. You know, sex workers speak, it comes as a sense of entitlement. When something goes wrong, they will say, I'm going to contact the police. This was unheard of in my generation of sex workers. We had to duck and hide. We would take scant time to screen our clients if we were working on the street. And our fear, of course, is that if we go back to having what might appear to be a light touch in respect to the introduction of a bylaw, nevertheless, it will take us back into that kind of relationship where we will perceive the police to not be our allies to combat violence or to turn to. So we would urge that the council not go down the path of introducing specific legislation, or indeed any legislation that targets sex workers or clients or other third parties, that you look to what is already happening, you know, with the collection of non-governmental organisations who are out there, who work in a collaborative way, who are leaning on the sex workers who are causing some of these situations, that you must rely on us, because I know from historical experience that regulations, laws, permits, fines, zonings, none of that seems to make any impact on the amount of sex work that can, you know, will occur. In fact, it could feed a kind of attitude where sex workers may feel less than friendly towards their neighbourhoods. One of the ideas we looked at, and you know, it has good and bad points, was in the Netherlands. They have particular areas, and of course they talk about amenities, they talk about providing toilets and showers. My personal favourite was the idea that they would have personal lockers for sex workers to keep their things. And another personal favourite, which was something that was quite interesting, was something they referred to as cuddle walls, where they're heated walls for very cold cities in winter, where residents by day would lean up against them and warm their backs, and you know, just slightly innovative things that would encourage people perhaps to work in certain areas. I know in Wellington we have a heated sofa, a concrete sofa, that's a piece of art. I'm not saying that sex workers sit on it, because it's not in the sex worker area, but just innovative ideas that, you know, would encourage people to work in areas that are more friendly towards this kind of activity. I want to round up and say that we're vehemently opposed to zoning that would be coercive. Our concern would be that sex workers would be walking through an area and, you know, and this happened, in fact, in the days when we had soliciting, and would be mistaken for being out and about and sex working in breach of, you know, whatever the zone prescribed. Of course, we're opposed to permits. Sex workers ignore this. You know, it doesn't. It's not a system that we hope that you wouldn't reconsider. I want to stop because we've got Bridie who's going to present on the practicalities of what's happening on the ground here.
So here, as has been touched on, in 2011 the CBD was cordoned off, and street-based sex workers who traditionally worked south of Beeley Avenue on Manchester Street could not work from the traditional area and started to work from the residential area north of Beeley Avenue. When I started doing outreach with NZPC a year ago, I would observe 4 to 6 workers, and I understand that before my time it was more than 6 workers. Since then, whenever I do outreach with the outreach coordinator, I observe usually 0, sometimes 1 or 2. I have figures that I'll show you later which support that the drift is continuing south. There are still issues working south of Beeley Avenue. The workers themselves have disclosed that they prefer to work north of Beeley Avenue because roadworks south of Beeley Avenue on Manchester Street affect traffic flow. I go up and down Manchester Street, both driving and walking on my way to work, and observe impediments both to foot traffic flow and to car traffic flow. There is in your agenda, there is a council citation that there are about 120 street-based sex workers working in Christchurch. We would estimate that on any given evening this would be an absolute maximum of 20. So I just want to highlight that, and I've discussed that figure with the other agencies, Youth and Cultural Development and the Salvation Army and the police, and they sort of think, yeah, 20 absolute maximum. So just want to flag that. So Mr. Webb pointed out that only 8 nights, there was only an 8-night observation period, so the suggestion that the figures had dropped was inconsistent with residents' observations, and I've alerted to my own observations. YCD provided us with this very helpful data of their observations of the number of sex workers north of Beeley. You'll see there it's in the middle of summer, so January, February, when the weather's favourable. 2 is observed on 2 occasions. 0 to 1 is the usual number. I won't go into detail about the public places bylaw. The person who provided the legal opinion to the council can elaborate on why they have found, both as a matter of fact and evidentially, why it would be inappropriate to apply it and difficult to enforce it. I will touch on, the regulatory approach. It's been accepted that it probably wouldn't work. There's also talk about whether or not it's recriminalisation. So if a worker is fined for trading in a public place, if it's found that that bylaw can be used in that way, and they don't pay the fine, they get summons to court, don't appear for court, then they can be prosecuted for failing to appear, which brings in a criminal element. One councillor touched on, have other options been exhausted? It was submitted that other non-regulatory options have been exhausted. In the same breath, it was accepted that they haven't. Changes in traffic flow, waiting to see if what might happen when the roadworks lift. We've certainly only recently upped our persuasion powers in terms of approaching these workers. So benefits to a non-regulatory approach, to continue using non-regulatory options, as well as the obvious, it's got a greater chance of working. There's the absence of legal issues. There won't be, any breaches of the Bill of Rights Act or the Prostitution Reform Act. It has the support of us and Youth and Cultural Development and the Salvation Army. And the police, the last time we met with the police, they indicated that this was their preference. Given that we all prefer this option, it's easy for us to work together. We all come from NGOs with limited resources, but if we can use our resources together with YCD's resources, together with the Salvation Army's resources, then it's, and you'll see that in our street outreach, how we work together. No one agency we can't do outreach on our own. YCD can't, the Salvation Army can't. We all come from different angles too, but when we pool our resources, we can work quite nicely together. So holistically, it's the best outcome for everyone, for sex workers, for residents, for the community. So Catherine and I will now take questions.
I don't know how much time we've got. Okay, we've reached the 10 minutes, but Sarah had her hand up, so I'll just let Sarah ask a question.
Thank you, and I think it's really important to look back to what has happened in the past, and I just want to clarify, is what you were saying earlier mean that should we take a regulatory approach, that it would become less likely for sex workers to report harm if they were at risk?
That's right.
So the levels of potential violence towards sex workers could increase if that was the case?
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's strong evidence for this.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. No, I'm sorry, the 10 minutes is up. Look, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And could I invite Erica Kers from the Salvation Army?
Good morning. I'm Erica Kess, and I'm a lieutenant in the Salvation Army. I want to thank you for this opportunity to present a deputation to Council on behalf of the Salvation Army. I'm the current Street Outreach Service Officer with a specific ministry to street-based sex workers. In making this deputation today, the Salvation Army will state our view that sex-based sex workers are often marginalised and vulnerable. Our concern is that introducing a regulatory approach to their working environment is likely to widen their marginalisation and vulnerability, making positive change and communication less likely, with safety risks also likely to rise as a result. The Salvation Army has shown care for sex workers since its earliest days and has operated our Christchurch Street Outreach Service for several years. Sex workers can be vulnerable to violence, robbery, drug and alcohol abuse and exploitation, and the Salvation Army values our opportunity to provide a listening ear and practical assistance when this is required. Although the Salvation Army does not endorse the use of sex as a commodity for purchase, we do believe it's important that all sex workers are given respect and that their safety, health and human rights are upheld. We also believe that while it's an individual's choice to work within the sex industry, it's important that opportunities are made available for those who do wish to leave the industry. Our Street Outreach Service is a team consisting of the Salvation Army and the NZPC. We operate from the corner of Manchester Street and Salisbury Street in front of Briscoe's every Wednesday night from 9 to 11 p.m. Street Outreach is clearly visible as a camper van with Salvation Army signage. The service provides a safe and non-judgmental space for workers to come for social and spiritual support, as well as to receive help and advice from the NZPC. In addition, the Salvation Army, NZPC and street-based sex workers network with Youth and Cultural Development City Council and the police through our bi-monthly interagency meetings. This helps keep lines of communication open between all parties, as well as providing a forum to discuss and address the concerns of local residents. The Salvation Army also recognises the difficulties that residents are facing because of street workers operating in the area. Of particular concern is the possible impact on children. We understand that any solution needs to be considerate of and try to address the desires of residents for a safe and respectful environment for their families and visitors. As a mother, I can certainly understand residents' concerns. While wishing to find a way for all parties to coexist in a way that seems respect and safety upheld as paramount values, the Salvation Army would urge Council to adopt a non-regulatory approach, where as a community we can work together for positive change on Manchester Street. We do not want to see life become harder for vulnerable people such as sex workers or other demographic groups such as rough sleepers. We believe a solution can be found that will satisfy everyone without the need for a regulatory approach like new bylaws or police enforcement. The number of women working around Purchase Street has decreased significantly, and we think with a bit of work a solution can be found that satisfies everyone. We are not intending to minimise the significant concerns for the well-being of residents and the overall environment on Manchester Street, but believe a regulatory approach is not the answer. Such an approach is likely to create further tensions between residents and sex workers. A regulatory approach is also likely to increase safety concerns for sex workers who may become more fearful of reporting incidents or abuse or mistreatment to the police. This approach would also be difficult to enforce. If another place was available for the woman to go that was safe and had with toilets and bins, we think they'd be happy to go there. If we force these women to move, we risk pushing them to places that are less safe. The Salvation Army believes every human life is valuable. We don't want to be telling these women that their safety is worth less than anyone else's, especially not when there are ways to safely help everyone involved when the cost could be a camera, a toilet and a bin that would be used by the whole community. As well, it's important to note that while a regulatory approach addresses sex workers, it does not address other groups in the area, such as the homeless or young people. A regulatory solution that targets just one group, rather than looking more broadly at other demographics represented in the area, risks being perceived as discriminatory as well as limited in its effect. As we've been communicating with the sex workers over the past few months, we have noticed that the number of women working around Purchase Street has decreased and that women have shown more consideration towards residents. We believe that through positive communication and strategies, including communication between residents, sex workers, the Salvation Army, NZPC, YCD and police and council, it is possible to find a workable resolution to the challenges that we currently face. We would like to see Council, in cooperation with the Salvation Army, NZPC, YCD, police and residents, take a non-regulatory approach to ensure that Manchester Street is a safer community where all demographics, including street-based sex workers, are treated with dignity and respect. We hope that the diversity of this community can be embraced so the safety of sex workers and residents, especially the children, are ensured in a positive manner. Our hope is that we can problem solve and move forward together rather than adopting the backward step of a regulatory approach, which we believe is likely to increase safety issues and negative communication between the sex workers and residents. I thank you for your time and considerations and now invite your questions.
Erica, thank you for your submission and for the work you do through the Salvation Army. I just want to ask you if there might be a compromise here, like the Mayor alluded to, and that is, okay, clearly the current regulations aren't working in terms of resolving things, and there's a whole lot of work being done by different groups that clearly, clearly would benefit from being coordinated better. So the other part too, though, if we were to make sure, if we were to amend one of the existing bylaw and make sure that in fact it isn't punitive, but in fact works better than the existing rules we have, would that have potentially be helpful?
I think any amendment would be, the crucial thing would be to communicate with the organisations who are currently working with the sex workers. So if we did do an amendment, it would be with consideration to NZPC, YCD, Police and Salvation Army as well, because we're on the street and we know the ladies, and I guess for me it's about ensuring that their voices are being heard.
Thank you, Erica, and I'd like to thank you most sincerely for all the work the Salvation Army does with the community in Latimer Square and beyond. I know of that work, and I know a lot, well, until now it flies under the radar, but thank you. Just in relation to what Phil, my colleague, has said, I actually didn't hear, I heard Duncan Webb taking quite a reasonable approach, I thought, and he did make the point of that it wasn't either or. So, parent to parent,
yes.
Church member to church member,
absolutely.
Our values are about building neighbourhoods and communities. So I think what we're looking for, would you accept that where things aren't working, you actually do have to take steps sometimes to ensure that communities are working together rather than pitched against each other?
Yes. So again, it is about working together and having those lines of communication open. So some of the observations in the report alluded to other demographics as well, which clearly aren't being addressed in here. And it's actually understanding the situation as a whole that has decreased over time. And I have noticed, like earlier, I noticed the situation has arisen since 2011. I was speaking with a lady just last night, and the reason why she doesn't work in an indoors situation is because of the quakes. A lot of the establishments were destroyed, so a lot of women have actually been driven to the street, but that's now decreasing as well as other options are becoming available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica. Now, you mentioned the bi-monthly meetings.
Yes.
Are they currently still being held?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that the City Council has not been attending those.
They have. They lead it. They tend to chair it.
Okay. Maybe it's something that's fallen over from the election, I'd say. Yeah, because prior to the election, I was a member of that group.
Oh, okay.
The council does the secretarial side of it, takes the minutes and writes the reports, etc. So, okay, so we need to pick that up again, our membership. And you mentioned that amenity, like toilets, bins, lights, cameras. Every time the City Council has tried to be proactive and put these in, we've had a real knee-jerk reaction from surrounding residents and businesses to say we don't want that here. But not only that, council is then accused of actually proactively encouraging prostitution or street work, right? So to me it seems the only way forward here is to actually hand these solutions over to another organisation. So can you think of anyone who might wish to lead some support like that?
I personally would love to. The Salvation Army would love to provide a place that's actually a safe environment. Currently working out of a camper van. It is limiting because only so many people can actually fit in there, and in winter it's not ideal. To have a physical place, in other words a building. Originally Street Outreach was in a building in the city. Unfortunately that got damaged in the quake and we haven't obtained one since.
Something like that, Bedford Road. It was quite central, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yes.
And so do you think then that the location of that is quite crucial?
I think so.
So it would be where?
Ideally Manchester Street.
Right.
Ideally. It could be through NZPC or YCD or with all of us together.
Yeah.
It could be that we pool our resources together.
I mean, we were working
Yeah,
with Sarah at some point
kind
as
of,
well.
I let you ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we know where the gap is. We need to fill that gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Di Lucas and Barry Brooker from the Peterborough Village Incorporated Society.
Barry. Oh, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having us here today. Barry's going to start, I think.
Dawn and I are not representing groups as such. We're both involved with the Peterborough Village Group and with Moa Neighbourhood Group. And I think that's important for this discussion because those are communities that are south of Beeley Ave. And we do see a difference between those in the very core living residential zone north of Beeley Ave and the more mixed area that we live in. And so I think that is quite an important distinction. We feel some sympathy for those in the Purchase Street area. Being south of Beeley Ave, we've experienced a lot of those activities, but I think we are more of the view that there is a way around those and some of those issues have to be addressed. I suppose the starting point is, as others have said, prostitution or street-based sex work is legal in New Zealand, and that sort of thing's been going on for thousands of years. It's not going to stop. So it seems if it's legal, it's going to continue. We have to find some good solutions to this. And a number of us in the Peterborough Moa groups, and I can't say all of us because there are diverse views, but we do see that the sex workers, particularly for those of us living south of Beeley, are part of our community. The discussion often goes that there's a community and then there's the sex workers who are somehow not part of it. For us, they are part of our community, and we want to make it safe for them and life to be reasonable for those residents who live there. So we're looking for a solution for both parties. Without going into detail, we do also note the frustration when the council has tried to put safer conditions in for street-based sex workers, and there has been a lot of opposition. We have supported that in the past, but other residents in our groups have actually been quite anti. But we do see there's sort of a carrot and stick issue. At the moment, people seem to be focusing on the stick, but perhaps the carrot of somewhere safe to work would actually solve some of our issues. The other one is that it would seem that the issues facing people north of Beeley is also one of the unexpected outcomes of the earthquakes. And being residents along the Manchester Street area, we do see the sex work north of Beeley reducing over time. So part of our submission really is that in the next year, I think a year from now, things will be different. Than they are now. And really, the earthquakes and all of the roadworks have resulted in an unexpected change to the way sex workers are operating. So for us, really, I think if we just went back to the idea that a sense of community is really important here, that the sex workers are part of that community. We want them to be safe. We want our residents to feel it's a safe and good place to live. And as a result, we don't think another law, regulatory change, should be the first way of dealing with that. We are hoping if it was addressed a year from now, things may be different than they are. But we do see a real need to keep talking with all those groups involved. And I think the thing about being here today, which has been really positive, it doesn't matter which approach you've taken, everybody has wanted a community that is safe for everybody. And I think all the speakers have said that. We differ only really in how this can be achieved.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry. Now, we've provided a copy of a a letter from two locals from Lynette and Phil Stenning, who live just by the Manchester Street Salisbury corner, and their place is damaged. They're going to moving after 21 years there. They're moving on to Manchester Street, and they've written there. I won't read it out. Can do that, but they find it totally acceptable, and that the sex workers are part of the community. And when there are sex workers that are difficult, they might be noisy, something, they talk to them, tell them it is an issue, and generally it's sorted. And I know that for me, I've lived on Manchester Street since 1991, and I work from my office there, and the sex workers moved into the street in the mid-90s, and for us, there is not an issue. Sometimes there's some really noisy people, and we have, one time I went to the Prostitutes Collective, and I went to the van, and I met them, late at night, and I talked with them. There was an immediate change in behaviour. I told them what was upsetting the locals, the girls yelling across intersections, things like that. And when I talked to them, they were so pleased that someone would come and talk with them about it, and there was a complete change in behaviour. And so we think we can work these things through, that they are part of our community, and if we're reasonable and discuss things and respectful, then we will have a solution. I'll tell you one incident. My partner's car was broken into one night. A sex worker called the police. So it shows that we've got a two-way thing here about community. So we think that it's important that the Central City residential area, we're in the separate zone south of Beeley Avenue, and that this is a traditional, what Duncan Webb referred to as a traditional area, and for the general thinking in the community is it's not a problem. We have never, in the Peterborough Village, which is also a post-quake phenomenon, we've never had people come and ask for an agenda item to address sex workers, so I think that that's an indication that it's not seen really as an issue. Okay? You're welcome. Any questions?
Yep. Sarah?
Thank you, and I like the way that you talked about it being about community, and I like the way that the letter names Jade and humanises her.
Yes.
It's not someone that's other and marginalised, which I really like. I was just wondering about other nuisance behaviours. So do you get, as inner city residents, is the occasional sex worker nuisance behaviour the only type of nuisance, or is there alcohol-related behaviours and those kind of things, and what's more frequent?
There's alcohol-related noisy nonsense around. We're Central City residents. You expect that sort of diversity around. People don't come to live in the Central City to expect them to be as if they're in a quiet suburb. And, it's a diversity, and people move there for the diversity, and it's appreciated.
And I think some of the issues which are probably blamed on the sex workers are not actually the sex workers. Mm-hmm. There are other rowdy elements in the street.
Yeah, a drive-by culture that is noisy.
Yanni?
Thank you. I just thank you for the deputation. Would you support us putting pressure on CCDU to get, Otago to get Manchester Street finished, and actually then seeing what happens before we sort of embark on quite a difficult piece of work if we are going to go down the regulatory?
Definitely. I definitely don't think there should be anything at the moment. We're still very much in a transitional arrangement with the roadworks and things, and you can barely drive down at the moment. It's an artificial environment at the moment further south in Manchester Street, so I think it would be very good to tie-ho on.
Do you have any thoughts about what you think might happen once that work's complete with the nice boulevard and?
No, I don't. We have a lovely diversity of people using Manchester Street. the Margaret Mayhew Playground. We have a lot of families coming up and down. We have this new tourist accommodation on Beeley Ave, and we have a lot of tourists walking up and down. There's a lovely, lively mix of people using the street, and that's healthy. That's important, and I think that will just increase with the boulevard being completed.
Thank you. And I suppose from a personal sense, it would be great if the council was brave enough to once again have a go at toilets and facilities that may resolve some of these issues. And when I was residents, we're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because our neighbours are saying, no, don't do that. It looks like you're attracting them. But we really do need to make it safe for them. And also, that will also make it safer for those who live there.
Yes. A toilet was put in, a porta loo was put in and available for use workers on a site, but also open to the street for the sex workers. Unfortunately, various parties, perhaps the drunken ones, have pushed it over several times, and so it's been taken away. Now that's unfortunate. It's good to have a toilet there that's available, and that was a good facility. So it just needed securing, really. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful and great submission. Thank you very much. Stuart Fletcher.
Good morning. My position is really about the data that's being provided, the observations, more around we seem to have a conflict of information from 0 to 1 between 8:30 and 11 o'clock on the data that's being provided, and then the Salvation Army, which suggested that perhaps a caravan would not be big enough for all users. My concern in my letter, in the submission, sorry, I've got a heinous cold, was around the defecation and condom waste that is very evident around the area. I have an 8 and a 6-year-old. We step over these sort of things on a daily basis, especially outside certain primary schools. And I actually, I'm just frustrated by the whole process of it. And I'm kind of wondering, just as this hearing started to take some shape, why a partial bylaw wouldn't actually be a good idea, in the sense of putting a specific area around where workers can actually work, if this is something that we can't change and it's part of the community, and perhaps we actually build the facility and have a bylaw outside of that. Then it becomes a punitive response, but within that area it's actually quite legal. Those are my thoughts. We have Di, I think, made some very good comments, and Barry made some very good comments on the sense of community, and we don't want to push people out and be overly negative on it, but it is actually having an impact on people like ourselves. My family, we drive down the street and we end up with being waved at. My 8 and 6-year-old quite rightly say, "What is that about?" I just say they're extremely friendly people. And then we have to get into the whole scenario of, well, why are they waving, Dad? So we actually start avoiding these sort of areas between certain times of day or night, which I don't think that's part of community. We use the Margaret Mayhew Park, it's a fantastic facility, but we have to drive past a certain element of the community, and we can sort of, I don't know, close it away. Hunter Corner in Auckland have the same sort of problem. It's the element that attracts other elements to the area, which then by default causes all sorts of undue problems, and that's what I'm concerned about as a resident of St Albans. Yeah. Questions?
Well, one of the elements that was brought to our attention was that if you have a very tight regulatory environment within which people can only operate, when they're walking to there, they can be also targeted, you know, like, so Do you think it could be a little bit more flexible in terms of the approach that you'd want the council to adopt? But I did hear you say that you'd support us providing facilities in a particular area as long as it wasn't residential. Is that?
Again, it comes down to the data. The police have got more CCTV coverage than anybody else in the city, and having a static, I don't know if the Prostitutes Collective review of the area or frequency of use or how many people were actually attended in the area was actually a static approach, or was it just a walkthrough? I imagine that there would be an element of there would be a general turnover of customers and what have you. So I think we need to actually invest in a proper 30-day review or data collection by somebody who's, an independent body, if you like, that is actually going to count the number and look at the problems and actually do proper walkthroughs on, okay, well, there's condom wrappers here and there's other elements of human evidence over here. I think that's required, and from a resident's perspective, I think it's absolutely necessary that we have all of the facts as opposed to a selective snapshot of one night, perhaps, which may have been extremely cold, or maybe it was just I don't know. Who knows? I don't think there's enough information to make any great call, but I think heading down the track of some sort of flexibility with facilities or something would be extremely helpful, and maybe having a look at that.
Was it a problem in St Albans at your end of the street when before the earthquakes?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
Okay.
Around Shepparton, Trafalgar, Dover, and English Park. It could be 15-year-olds, but I don't know. Hopefully 16. But it has always been a problem, and it's become worse post-quake.
Very good. Any other questions? Aaron?
Yeah, I do feel for you having that conversation with your children, and before we had a great submission, almost the difference between inner city living and suburban living, and I think there is that clear line at Beeley Ave where you go from inner city living to suburban living, and you do expect more rowdy people in the inner city, as we heard, and some of the people that live in there openly accept street workers. They seem okay with that, but you don't expect that in the suburbs. And I have children myself. The oldest is 12, and so that's my daughter, and I've got a son who's 9, and my children know transgender people. They know gay people. They know what it is to be those people. We don't talk about what those people do behind closed doors, or what heterosexual people do behind closed doors. But the conversation I find really hard to have with my children, and so that's my question to you, is how do you have that conversation with children of what a street worker does when it is so obvious, and you do see that evidence left on the footpath? Because I've seen it, and unfortunately down by Margaret Mayhe, something that looks like a large used piece of chewing gum, and my children ask what it is. How do you explain that to your children? Because I'm sure not all of the councillors here have children, so if you could enlighten us how, as a parent, you
I don't know that that's particularly relevant or pleasant comment to make.
Do you not think it is?
I try not to engage in that sort of conversation. It comes.
Well, my point then is, if those people were standing at my gate, how do I explain that to my children?
I don't know that that's the question that we've been asked to answer, and we're talking to a resident who's making his very valid points to the council, and we are obliged to consider those and take those into account. But has anyone got any specific questions for Stuart? Sarah.
Thank you. And I know that while it's a wider society issue, and like beggars and things, that we find this uncomfortable that our society is at a state where we have people in more vulnerable and marginalised situations. And I was just wondering if, because you have very local, real impacts from this wider thing, I'm just wondering if you've taken Di's approach at all and had an individual conversation with someone who's been working locally to let them know of those individual impacts on you and your family, and to see if you can actually, have you managed to talk to someone about that, one of the workers? Have you tried that approach? No. Do you know if any of your neighbours have?
I think the conversation that we have on the weekend, for example, was simply around consideration, and if there is an element of a belief of community focus, then let's just have some general consideration. What we're stepping over and what I'm finding on the streets, it's not considerate.
No.
We seem to be having a belief that everything happens around the Manchester or just north of or thereabouts. These people hop in their vehicles and they drive to other parts, and one of them outside certain primary schools and parking areas. It's consideration. If you use something, pick up after yourself, then we probably wouldn't know that you'd been there. But it's this general lack of community, if you'd like.
Yeah, but have you talked to them about that, the workers themselves?
No, I would happily engage in that conversation.
Like it could be an approach that is useful.
Yeah. Pauline?
You just quickly, a lot of the data that you refer to that's been, the surveys that have been done, seem to me they kind of finish around 11:30 or 12. Is there a reason for that, or does it not continue after 12? Or
I don't know. I haven't been privy to all of the information that's been provided, or I've come in secondary to this.
So what I'm asking you is there activity between, say, midnight and dawn, or does it tail off?
I've driven through the city on the way to the airport when I was living in across the other side of town, and it's 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right,
There's
thank
absolute activity right through to, I think, up to midday or thereabouts. Or maybe it starts at midday and it's a 24-hour shift. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And, we really appreciate the fact that you've made the time and effort to come and speak directly to the council. I know it can't always be easy to do so, so it is appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Giles Gordon.
That's my wife Suzanne as well.
Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll keep this brief. We don't live in Manchester Street anymore. We lived there from about 1990 till 2013. I won't bore you with the details of what we put up with the defecation, condoms, syringes, noise, concert noise, all that. That's well documented, well known. But all I can say is that after the 2011 earthquake, life changed quite dramatically for us. With the CBD being locked off, the prostitutes came and worked in our part of Manchester Street. We're just north of Beeley Avenue. And even after discussions with the girls, etc., on the odd basis, they said that, when the cordon is taken up, they'll move back to south of Beeley. When that cordon was moved, they didn't go, and the reason given was they actually feel safer working in a residential activity. They thought they had better access to people. Basically, from the 2011 earthquake, our life turned pretty bad. Okay, we had all sorts of promises from MPs. We had meetings at our house with MPs, we had councillors. There's only one councillor, one person, and I'm looking at him right now, who actually did anything concrete in the whole time. And his efforts were actually penalised by the council within 24 hours. If you remember, Aaron, the signs you put up, no prostitution. And the one thing that happened was the council took down the signs within 24 hours. So we felt actually quite let down by that part of things. Okay. As a job, I travel overseas on a regular basis with the constant noise at night, with lights going on, with yelling, etc. I didn't feel safe leaving Susie at home, so we moved. We had the ability to sell up. We took quite a financial loss to do that, but to me it was important that if I was overseas, I was happy that my wife was safe.
Could I just talk for a second?
Yeah.
Just on that point, we took a substantial loss on our two properties in Manchester Street, conservatively estimated at $250,000. So therefore we have significant interest in this entire thing. We've been significantly affected by the street worker activity, but everybody seems to want to just sweep it under the carpet. The various parties here today posture about street workers' safety and various parts of legislation that gives rights to workers, or parts of legislation that are difficult to prove in terms of trading. But the safety of the sex workers is not adequate reason to deny the residents of the affected area the enjoyment of their property. The street workers we encountered over 2 years were quick to state their rights, but rights come with responsibility. We never encountered a single street worker with any sense of responsibility. Through their generally alcohol and or drug affected psyches, there is no understanding from them as to how they're affecting the residential area. We encountered a range of behaviours, almost entirely negative. We were regularly verbally abused. Direct threats were made as to the safety of ourselves, our house and our dog. Occasionally we're physically jostled, and on one occasion I was assaulted. We had the non-emergency police phone number on speed dial for a range of complaints. Just let us understand, while there are probably some really nice street workers out there, many of them aren't. But it's not just about the street workers, it's about the people that they associate or who come to the area because of that activity. We had drug dealing, we've got the minders, we've got the clients. So perhaps the street workers do come from broken backgrounds, but it's not the responsibility of the affected neighbourhood to fix this. It is, however, the responsibility of council to ensure that these residents do not suffer these ongoing effects any longer.
And just in summary, I guess our points are threefold. One is that it's not just the sex workers. When you talk about surveys of 18 or 12 or whatever, it's the customers they bring, it's the weirdos that turn up, it's the people hanging around the street, it's the pimps, it's the drug dealers, all those sort of people. It changed neighbourhood for us completely. We fell out of love with what was going to be our superannuation, our project. The second thing is, I don't see that we need to feel sorry for these people. I mean, they're just people doing a business like anyone else. If I did the same thing, for example, outside the council offices, how far do you think I'd get before I was thrown out before the cops arrested me? So they're just people doing a job. I don't think there's any need to feel any social responsibility. The third thing is, it's a commercial activity at the end of the day. It's a straight commercial activity. It needs regulation. It needs to be curtailed. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Glenn?
Thank you for your deputation. It strikes me it's a proximity dynamic. So you've lived there, you've experienced it. We've heard a lot of kind of sympathy, empathy towards those working on the street today. That's fine, but from those who have been supportive, do any actually live in the area? Are they your former neighbours, for instance?
Sorry, what's the question?
The question is, I sense that those who live nearby know full well what's going on, but those living further away don't appreciate as much.
I think it's a very, very local problem, if that's what you mean, yeah. And we still keep in contact with the people because there is a community that lives there, of neighbours, of people raising kids, working, all that sort of thing. It's very strong. It's and just as wherever you live as a community, you know your neighbours, you know your people.
I'm trying to draw a parallel with the earthquakes. So if you were close to more affected areas, that's your experience. If you're further away, well, that colours it as well. You don't have the same appreciation of the.
It's fair comment. Of course it is. We lived it. Not everyone did. Yeah.
It's very hard, probably, unless you've lived through what we've been through, to get any real concept of the disruption to normal life. And I think it's fair to say that, even when we purchased in Manchester Street, north of Bailey Avenue, it was well known that there was some street worker activity in the CBD, but prior to the cordon going up, there was never a single street worker north of Bailey Ave. our lives changed very, very markedly.
I think the worst thing for us is that, you know, we fell out of love. We'd been there 20 years, we'd renovated an old villa, we'd, you know, put in gardens, we'd made it, you know, our little place in the world, and we fell out of love with it because what happened on the street. And I think the thing that finally did it for me was when we had a new Labrador puppy. It's 8 weeks old, and it's out in the driveway licking at a condom. You know, it's hard to describe the feeling that gives you.
Pauline?
Thank you for coming, and I know that's very difficult for you speaking about this, and I can feel the emotion that you have about this, and I really understand that. We're hearing a lot about the activities possibly moving back towards town, etc., but my question to you is, have you found you can be disrupted heavily by just one person? Or is it always a whole lot of activity all at once?
You mean one person yelling?
Whatever.
Okay, the disruption was A, what was left behind, B, it was things like security lights coming on at different times, the cars just idling on the street, you know, the throbbing of the engines, etc., the yelling across the street. So, was it any one person?
No, not a specific. Is it a question of numbers, or can one person soliciting cause you disruption?
One person can definitely cause disruption, Pauline. There was one known person who was affected by substance of some sort and sing loudly right into the early hours of the morning, loudly.
So it's not always a question of a whole lot of numbers gathering in one place. It's just, it can be one person that can just do this.
Correct.
Thank you.
It could be, but there was that flow-on effect of, you know, the old one person, then it's another person, then it's another person, yeah.
Mike?
Thank you. When you lived on Manchester Street, was it just an intersection that the street work was at, or was the whole street north of?
Oh, it went from Beeley, and they were about three blocks up towards Cannon, is it?
At its worst, though, extending up to and occasionally past Cannon Street, so at least 2 blocks. But primarily the block between Manchester and Purchase, and particularly the Purchase corner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Look, thank you very much, and appreciate again the effort in coming in and making a deputation to the council. Thank you. We have another deputation which is on a completely different matter, so could I invite Bernie De Vere, Corporate Property and Marketing Manager, Ceres New Zealand, to speak to item 16, Central City Regeneration, tackling barrier sites. Lunch as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors, for allowing me to come and speak here today. My name is Bernie De Vere, and I'm speaking on behalf of Ceres New Zealand. I'm the corporate manager for Ceres New Zealand, and I'm also a director of the companies that own the Peterborough Centre and Victoria Mansions. As I have not spoken here at the council before, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ceres New Zealand. It was established around the time of the earthquakes in 2011, and it was a sister company to Ceres Environmental, which has been in business in the States for 40 odd years. Ceres in the States is a company that, it's a disaster recovery company, responds to earthquakes, storms, carries out a lot of civil works, and principally the difference with disasters in the States and disasters in New Zealand is in the States we contract in advance of a disaster. So we are a first responder for many cities. For instance, the city of Los Angeles, if it has an earthquake, we're expected to respond within, instant response. So it's quite different. Our activities in New Zealand have involved the demolition of major buildings in the city here, including the old City Council chambers. We carried out quite two notable implosions, the police station and radio broadcast house. And more in recent times, we've been taking down high-rise buildings in Wellington, the big building in Molesworth Street and the Readings Theatre building. As well as that, we've recently carried out demolition in Palmerston North Town Centre and demolition works in Dunedin with the hospital and the university. So we have quite a diverse activity going on around the country. I'd like to take the council back to a time when Sarah had a policy to order the demolition of any dangerous buildings. A Section 38 notice was served, and a body corporate or owner had 10 days to respond, and if they didn't respond, Sarah took the power of the property from these people and proceeded to demolish the building. Now, around this time, both the Peterborough Centre and Cranmer Courts were issued with Section 38 notices, and we had stand-up arguments in Peterborough Street, our engineers versus Sarah engineers, and we convinced Sarah that we could make safe that building and save it. Cranmer Courts was not successful. They were dysfunctional in terms of their being able to cooperate with one another, and we lost Cranmer Courts, which was just terrible. And you may recall how people responded in the streets around that time. So, as a part of our plan to save the Peterborough Centre, it was essential to cordon off the footpaths and cordon off Victoria Street. We have had to cover the cost of that for the past 5 years and maintain the cordons. And at the same time, we've been fighting with our insurers, and I'm sure as councillors you know how difficult it is when you're dealing with insurance companies who want to pay out the minimum amount, and you've got an asset that needs to be repaired correctly. So that's the situation that we're in. We took our insurers to court. The court instructed an expert conferral process. Our engineers and our experts versus the experts of the insurance companies. Our conferral process has been the longest process that's taken place in Christchurch. We have dug trenches around the foundations of the Peterborough. We've cut into the floor slabs so we could see right through from one end of the foundation to the other. Unfortunately, it's not very pretty. The foundations of the Peterborough have been lifted up out of the ground. There are no steel in them. It's a very heavy building, and the turrets went up in the air and came down in the February earthquake and created huge damage inside. The southwest wall, it's been retained by containers with big water bladders in to keep the weight to hold the wall from falling over, and this was one of the reasons why the Peterborough Centre was going to be taken down. Now, the council are obviously concerned. We had a letter from Carol Ingalls with regards to people with prominent sites, derelict buildings, and here we are trying to save a very precious building, and we own two buildings and they're both very special heritage buildings. I'd like to address some of the damage that's occurred in Victoria Mansions and how we intend to save that. Victoria Mansions was built after the Napier earthquakes. It's a very heavy building. All of the internal walls are built of some sort of obscure block that came from overseas, which is plastered. All the inter-tenancy walls have got this block, and the building is very, very heavy. As mentioned before, the water table is high, and there is a penthouse on the roof that's poured solid concrete. Now, the only way we can remediate Victoria Mansions is to lighten the building. Now, we've had a team of 16 professional experts working in Victoria Mansions, from heritage people to design, engineers. We've just completed a complete strip out of the entire Victoria Mansions. There were no redeeming features inside relating to heritage. It had been stripped out sometime in the 80s. But we have taken a lot of the weight out. And the next job is that we need to get a resource consent to remove the penthouse off the roof. Now, all of these processes take a lot of consultation and a lot of time, and we feel personally that we're being targeted as a poor corporate citizen who's dragging their heels with 2 heritage buildings, and we're bringing down the look of the city, and that's just not right. So in a letter sent 16th of May from Carol Inglis, 30 sites seen as the most prominent examples of barrier sites with derelict buildings that are considered barriers to the regeneration of the city of Christchurch. What an insult. In a recent report, in the report before you today, it refers to an analysis of sites and described the building's owners as stubborn. Since we purchased the Peterborough Centre and made a major commitment to save it, we have had zilch response from the council. Not one person from the council has ever come along and said, how are you going? Do you want a hand? What's the damage? Not one person has shown any interest. So, Siri responds to the letter in the report as follows. We're extremely disappointed to read the letter, the report before you, and the council's new line that we have been included in a group described as stubborn owners. It is therefore of some concern that the council did not engage with Ceres in the preparation of the report. We do not consider this as best practice to provide notice to a company a mere 9 days notice before a report and its recommendations are presented to the council for approval. Stubborn and derelict. And we're trying to save a couple of precious buildings. It doesn't fairly and accurately reflect the position, does it? Ceres NZ has always placed a high priority on early and ongoing engagement with us in mind, and we make the following requests. It's requested that the report remain on the table. 2, that the council staff are instructed to engage with representatives of the 30 sites to ascertain a true and accurate position regarding the status of each property, because it probably follows that a lot of these other buildings are in a similar state and the owners are having similar problems. Once the council has this full information, it can then with certainty approach and engage recalcitrant building owners with derelict buildings, and where appropriate pursue formal enforcement strategies. Should the council not agree to adopt the above mentioned request, Ceres New Zealand formally requests that 25 Peterborough Street, the Peterborough Centre, and 91 Victoria Street, Victoria Mansions be removed from the list described in the report. This is the Central City Regeneration, tackling barrier sites. I thank you for hearing my deputation. It was never the business plan of Ceres to set out to save heritage buildings. We have made a huge investment in Christchurch, and we don't want to be seen as standing in the way of the recovery. And I just hope you can understand that what I've said is from the heart, and I'm sure you understand, because the council must have been in the same situation with buildings that the council owns. And if at any time in the future some councillors wanted to have a look inside these buildings, inside the Peterborough especially, you'd be shocked, but we would facilitate that. There are large pieces of masonry that have fallen down onto people's kitchen units. Most of the people's possessions are still in the Peterborough. So there's whiteware, there's beds, there's drapes, curtains, carpets, and we've recently thrown all of the stuff out of the Victoria Mansions and carted it to the dump, and that's what we'll have to do with the Peterborough. And we anticipate starting to do the soft strip out within a matter of weeks, because we're terribly concerned about fire risk. We've had people breaking in, we've got security there, we've got cameras, and all the time people are breaking in, sleeping in the beds. They've gone from one end of the building to the other and graffitied it, and it really upsets us greatly. But anyway, you've heard what we've had to say, and I hope you would take on board these requests that I've made. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate the time and effort that you came in, and just for the record, really appreciate stepping in on both Victoria Mansions and Peterborough Centre. I remember standing outside and watching the demolition of Cramner Courts, and it broke my heart and the heart of everyone else that stood there, so thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank
and
you
we'll
very
take
much.
you up on the offer of a site visit as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.